Welcome to Real Money, Real Experts, where we bring you interviews with leading financial professionals, sharing their stories, their challenges, and their advice for helping people manage money in the real world. I'm your host, Rachel DeLeon, Executive Director of the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, or AFCPE.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Brandy Baxter, accredited financial counselor, AFCPE member, and your 2025 AFCPE board president. On every episode, we take a deep dive into the topics and stories that you care about the most, helping clients, building community, and growing in your work and your career. Our guest today is Jon Akerman. Jon grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and graduated from college with a degree in financial mathematics. He became a credentialed actuary while working at a global consulting firm and living in the thick of the hustle right off Times Square. After several years, burnout set in, and Jon began searching for a change without knowing exactly what that change would be. Instead of staying stuck, he embraced uncertainty, relocating to a new state, joining the Florida Army National Guard, serving overseas, attaining the AFC credential, and joining an innovative budgeting software called MyBudgetCoach. Whew! Now, Jon coaches others experiencing burnout by giving them the tools to realize they can afford to make a change. He also trains financial coaches to use MyBudgetCoach in their own business. When he's not mathing or coaching, Jon enjoys volunteering, spending time with his wife, spending time with his 2 cats, and traveling.
Welcome to the show, Jon.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's kind of take it back from the beginning. As Brandy read your bio, you've had quite the winding journey through your career. And I think what's really interesting, and a lot of times people will feel burnout and feel stuck, but you made a change and have kind of really followed your passion. So, starting from the beginning, what drew you into the field as an actuary, and how did you manage to wind that road over to financial counseling and coaching?
I like math and I like science, but I didn't want to be a doctor. I come from a family of medical practitioners, and that's all. And I'm the youngest, so that's all I grew up hearing, table talk. And I just was so, I don't know, turned off by it just because it's all that I grew up with. So I didn't really know what else there was to do because there was so much of that. I didn't leave room for, to hear other things. And this thing, actuary, kept coming up, and I just explored it a little more, and it felt like a good fit. So I went down that road and took the test relatively quickly, got credentialed, and got my first job while in college. I interned and was offered full time before I graduated. And it was great, and I still do it, and I enjoy it. But what ended up actually happening was that I was in Times Square, and I was walking through Times Square every day to get to work. I lived in Times Square, and I worked in Midtown. And I went away for 2 weeks to Europe, and it was a disconnect type of trip. Like, don't work on the trip, don't look at your emails every day, that type of thing. And when I came back, how sometimes if, you don't see your grandmother or grandfather in a while, they see you growing up and they say, wow, you're so tall. So I was able to, the next day when I went back to work and I was walking through Times Square, I kind of, I didn't have my head buried in my phone. I was able to kind of look around and see what I was living in and passing through. And there's nothing wrong with New York or Times Square. I grew up there for 25 years. I love it. And I go basically every few months to visit. But it just wasn't in line with what I wanted to be doing. I wanted to kind of take a step back and, create room in my life for other things other than, the quote unquote grind. And I only had that realization because I was able to take a step back on this trip. And then I came back and I was able to basically see above the trees a little bit, above the, from a sky view, rather than constantly still in the weeds. And then once that happened, I sat on it for a couple of months, and the feeling just did not go away. And it just kept, nagging me, tapping me on the back, like, what are you doing? Like, why are you still here? You're not happy. So I just moved to Florida without knowing anyone. I don't know why. I mean, I know why. The reason is because I lived in New York and I didn't want to move anywhere that was colder. New York was my cold threshold. So I had a friend that was moving down to Florida for work. So we just moved down together without knowing anyone or anything. And one thing led to another. I went to the 75th anniversary of D-Day a few months after I moved, felt compelled to serve. So I signed up for the Army National Guard, did a deployment, came back, studied for my AFC. That was one way I was trying to figure out if that was the right way to serve for me. And I enjoyed it and I thought it was a great experience, but ultimately it didn't resonate as much with me as I was hoping. So then that led me to the AFC credential and to help people with their money. And I attained that about a year and a quarter ago, end of early 2024. And now I'm exploring that phase of my journey.
That is so awesome. It sounds like when you were talking about that call to serve when you joined the Army National Guard, I don't know if you know this, but I'm also an Air Force veteran and I can totally relate to feeling called to serve. But then there at the end, you mentioned that you also felt this draw to the AFC. Sounds like you were called to serve in that capacity as well. Tell us a little bit about what made you decide to become an AFC.
I think a lot of us in the AFC field, right, before we get the AFC or, move professionally into the field, a lot of times we're the de facto friend or family member that people come to with money questions or money issues, money advice. And that was largely true for me as well. And one of the things that happened in the military was I joined when I was 26 or 27. So, I joined as an enlisted, even though I had a college degree. I wanted to kind of be on that track rather than officer. So I was mixed in with basically a bunch of 18-year-olds fresh out of high school, 19, 20 maybe. And it was a great experience. But one of the scariest things I saw, and this is anecdotally, so it's not for the military at large, and I know there's tons of great resources that the military offers to help people with money. But I saw that basically a lot of these, privates were speaking to sergeants, and this was in the hype of Dogecoin, not to be confused with the current Doge, but when the meme coin was going up and down, and like there was some really intense advice given to these basically kids to invest in Doge and like all these what I perceived as harmful advice, especially for people that are 18-year-olds, potentially have $0 in expenses or fiscal commitments. And, it could be the most opportune time for them in terms of building savings and good money habits. And they're receiving this, not great advice. And then it made me realize, well, if I disagree, then maybe I should put my voice into the conversation. And I've already been helping people on a personal basis. So why not take that further and help people that I don't know and that can use that, hand.
I love that. I'm curious, did someone in particular introduce you to the AFC? And I know as an actuary, you have a lot of different designations behind your name as well. What made you decide to become an AFC rather than, a financial planner or CPA, or what made you decide AFC?
Yeah, so I like the idea of AFC because I want to be able to help the people that, generally speaking, these are generalities, so I know it's not true for everyone that holds a CFP. But in general, right, the expectation is that if you're going to be working with a financial advisor or CFP, a lot of times they have minimum requirements or net worth, net worth or income requirements. So I really want to help that underserved population, the people that want to take control of their money, that want to get better, that want to break out of paycheck to paycheck, but either, don't know how, and the people they do know that can help with money they don't fit into that person's niche for whatever reason, which is, that's fine. If that doesn't work for that business owner, it doesn't work. But I find that a lot of these people, they're right there. They just need to they just need a little bit of a guiding light, and they're looking for someone, and they keep getting turned away, come back later, come back when you have a positive net worth, or when you have this amount of assets or this amount of income. So I really want to get people to that stage and then hand them off to the CFP for the long-term future and the holistic and all that. But I want to be with them at the beginning. And I found that the AFC was a really good credential and education pathway to learning how to effectively do that and implement.
I love that.
I'm so glad you said that. That was my personal journey. I was the client who was like, no, you don't have enough assets for us to manage, or no, you don't have enough this. And I felt that shuffle being pushed around. So totally can relate to you on that. And honestly, that's what propelled me to become an AFC, because I wanted to be able to help people who were in the same situation that I had been in and felt as if there was nowhere for them to go. And, I think about when we talk about serving the population that we serve as AFCs, we often jump to the underserved population. And while many of us have a heart for that, it's a misconception that people with high incomes don't also have money struggles, right? We can sometimes think, oh, if you have, multiple zeros in your bank account, then surely you don't have any money problems. But that's not the case. What are some of the issues that you see higher net worth clients facing?
Yeah, it's really tempting to, sometimes, I've done it also. We can roll our eyes when we hear about someone that's saying they don't have enough money, but that they make multiple hundreds or even million of dollars. And it's easy to roll our eyes and write them off, but there's really so much more that goes into it, because some of these people, right, they could be supporting multiple generations. They could be helping their parents, grandparents, helping their kids. They can be stretched really thin. I mean, we all know, whether or not we have kids, right, we all know that the more people a single income needs to support, right, the less there is to just go around. So if you add parents into the mix, kids, aunts, uncles, nieces, I mean, some cultures really support everyone within the family and not just the immediate family. And you could be making $400,000 a year, but if you're supporting 7, 8, 10 people, it may not stretch that far. And then in addition to that, a lot of these people, they may have organizations depending on them, right? They may be giving thousands of dollars away to charity, and they can feel the stress that if they don't produce, that organization, which largely relies on their contribution, they'll struggle as well. So they're stretched thin because they have these, for an example, they could have these people or these organizations depending on them, and they feel the need to, constantly produce and maybe not even take care of themselves first before helping others. And then there's obviously the usual suspects, lifestyle inflation, not getting off the hedonic treadmill, expenses rising faster than income, just bad money management, that could be helped with a financial coach or just a financial therapist.
Jon, that's really true. And I think everybody's situation is really unique, and being able to meet them where they are and listen and really understand. I think we all sort of recognize these biases behind how we look at people. And when you kind of peel back the curtain, there's a lot more to help navigate. You talked a little bit about some of the changes you've made in your own life. And I'm curious, when you're working with someone as an AFC, as a financial coach, what advice do you have for people who are looking to make meaningful change?
I usually try to ask a series of questions that gets them, a lot of times the conversations will start off a little subdued or, frustration and things like that. And I'll try to ask a series of questions where I can change that temperament to joy or to happiness, and I could see it creeping up. And once we get to that point where the mood has changed, and it helps isolate the things that, light them up, essentially, because that's literally what happened. They came in frustrated, potentially, bored, like depressed or at the situation, and helping them discover what really lights them up. And then highlighting that fact, and then drilling down on how to make more of it, or how to just make it a reality at all, depending on the type of thing it is. So once we can identify those things and say them out loud, and help the client really identify it, right? Not prescribe like, oh, I think you'll like this and that, but it's more getting them to get to that realization. And then and then pausing there and drilling down on it. Like, what is it about it? How to get to it? And then essentially just building out SMART goals to, you know, I'm forgetting the word, but to basically have them like documented in stone. And, a lot of times when we do these things, we think they have to be financial related, but these goals don't need to be financial related, right? It could be learning a language or something like that. Obviously, money helps because it could dictate the type of resources you have access to attaining these goals, such as traveling to a native speaking country or or buying a good course or series of books. But it's really just helping the client identify what lights them up and then creating a path together to get them there.
I want to go back to something you said a moment ago. It keeps swimming inside my brain. And you talked about you were working and doing all the things and you went on this trip and you said it was like a disconnect trip. And I'm just sitting here thinking, how many of us need a disconnect trip from the day-to-day of our lives? And Jon, you may or may not know this, but most of our listeners tend to be professionals in the financial space. And even for those who are not, we're not all familiar with MyBudgetCoach. And we also have some in our space who are working in private practice. So tell us a little bit about what made you decide to join up with MyBudgetCoach versus either starting an independent practice or doing some other things in the personal finance space. Tell us a little bit about how you landed there.
Yeah, so the owner, Zach, he reached out to me a year ago, actually. I think it was March 5th, 2024. And, we spoke and I thought this was a genius idea. So essentially what MyBudgetCoach does, it's another zero-based budgeting software. In that regard, it's similar to a lot of existing softwares, but what makes it unique is that it builds in the coach. So users sign up, they select a coach, or we recommend a coach depending on how they want to go, if they don't want to sift through. And then right when they sign in, that coach they picked, their face pops up, and there's basically this built-in avatar that's going to guide them through setting up their budget. And it is a static conversation and the client clicks through it at their own pace. But what's amazing is that a lot of times that beginning of a relationship with a client, right? It could be, depending on how things are laid out, it could be tedious and at times frustrating because a lot of it is just questionnaires, aggregating data, getting things together, which sets the stage for everything that's to come. But right, the client's paying money, you're spending your time, and immediately you don't have anything to show for it, right? You just have all this stuff. But obviously it's very important to get that stuff. So this really streamlines that process while giving them the human touch, because these conversations and avatars are written by the coach. They're not just copy paste or AI. Each coach imbues it with their money beliefs, money personality, and financial coaching, methods. And it really it saves the client money and it helps them get set up on their own time, people with erratic schedules. And then it also helps the coach scale because they can theoretically onboard, 10 people simultaneously at 1 a.m. when they're sleeping. And once the user and the client are set up, they have the option to message or call the coach through the app. Set up, and they're not going to call as in through the phone, but they'll set a Zoom or Teams call, whatever it is the coach uses for their software. And that's when they could jump right into, money psychology, goal setting, fear setting, any sort of direction that they want to go. And the foundation's already built there, and it was kind of seamless and removing a lot of the friction. So once I learned about it, I was immediately hooked, and I saw that this idea really could go somewhere. And I, immediately asked to join him on the journey. And that's where we are now.
Jon, at the end of every podcast, we always ask our guests to share their 2 cents. And we like to think of our podcast as a knowledge bank. So if you had to put 2 cents in our bank, what real money quote would you add?
I do love these 2 cents. I do listen to the podcast, and there's definitely been some really good ones. So I don't know if this will rank, but I'll do my best. I always try to internally keep in mind to be contrarian. And, there are always reasons, pros and cons to the other side. And listening to those, actually listening, not just hearing, but listening to them, at the least, it provides a new perspective, which you may or may not agree with, and you may still, fall into the same side that you came in with. But other times you could even change your mind as you learn more about the topic. And either way, whether you change your mind or you don't change your mind, just listening to the other side really goes a long way in just growing, professionally and personally.
I love that. I feel like in today's environment, being contrarian and open and listening not only works well within our own field, but also within our life. So that one really resonates with me.
Totally. I like how you talked about pros and cons of both sides. As financial professionals, we can sometimes feel like, well, I have all this knowledge, so this is the way to do it. But just being open to listening and hearing a different perspective from our clients, super, super valuable.
I'm going to throw you one more curveball at the end because we talked a little bit about travel and taking that vacation. What's next up for you?
Oh, wow. That is timely. I am actually tomorrow going to a wellness retreat, and they also do not allow phones or technology outside of the room. So I am looking forward to disconnecting again, and I guess we'll see what comes out of that weekend.
Yeah, you might have some more 2 cents to add to our bank after that trip.
Jon is totally giving me all the ideas. I'm like, Brandy, note to self, schedule a disconnect trip.
Yeah, they're amazing. It really helps. People don't need to make big changes. Right? Some people are good where they are. They just need to reset and start fresh. So this is not that, everyone needs to make changes or anything, but definitely disconnecting and just picking things up where we left them off is itself very powerful.
Well, Jon, tell us where our listeners can connect with you.
So you can find me on either cashflowfitness.com. That's my personal business where I'm able to help individuals directly. And then I'm also listed as a resource on MyBudgetCoach. And I also work for MyBudgetCoach, helping get coaches that are interested in working in incorporating MyBudgetCoach into their programs or with their clients. So you can reach me on mybudgetcoach.com as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It was great to connect with you and learn more about your story.
Thank you for having me.
Rachel, what another great episode. Jon just gave such great insights around the importance of budgeting and how we really need to be open to hearing different perspectives from our clients. But my favorite takeaway from this episode was the disconnect trip. What about you?
Oh, hands down. I could actually be there with him as he told the story of walking through, New York City and suddenly seeing things differently. And I think so many of us take that for granted. You remove yourself from your everyday environment and suddenly you come back with new perspective. And I really think that can also be taken into the interaction that we have with clients. It's like we change our perspective, you change your situation, you open your ears and you start to listen to other experiences. And suddenly the way you look at the world around you shifts too. And so I love that idea. I am already making plans for my disconnect trip. It is very timely and much needed, but love conversations like Jon's, love hearing how people navigate through the field, into the field. And so many of our professionals, come from so many different backgrounds and walks of life, but they're all driven by this really important, just tug at really helping others figure out their finances and live their best life. So great episode and always fun to do it with you, Brandy. Thank you so much for joining us this week. I just wanted to let our listeners know it is April, which is Financial Literacy Month, and we also have so many great things going on at AFCPE. Right now, our invitation to present is open, and so if you want to share content, experiences, research at our annual symposium, I encourage you to visit our website and submit a presentation for consideration. Also, now is a great time to register for the symposium. We have early bird pricing from now through the summer. And of course, when you think of Financial Literacy Month, education is at its core, and we're educating our clients every day, but continuing to educate ourselves. Now is the perfect time to consider becoming a member. Sign up for a webinar, lean into the community. It's more important now than ever. The opinions of our podcast guests are their own, which means that their stories, views, or lived experiences may differ from yours or mine. However, the one thing you will always find on this show is a common thread. Our guests are passionate about helping people with their money to improve their lives, and they believe in upholding high standards for the clients and the communities that they serve. We encourage you to tune in to Real Money, Real Experts with open curiosity. Why? Because it's oftentimes in the conversations where viewpoints or stories differ from our own that we learn the most.